Hello everybody. My name's Ellen Ingram. I've met some of you I've been working with Jonathan Fisher and our whole volunteer team since April. I got interested in the whole physician burnout field, and I was just researching it for about a year. And through that networking and LinkedIn, that's how I met Jonathan and joined the team in April. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm excited to hear these next speakers. And one distinction, all three of these speakers have written books. And I just think that, that really just says a lot about the quality of speakers that have volunteered for this summit. And after we start, I'm going to put in the chat how you can purchase these books, because we set up a merchandise booth so that anyone could purchase any of the speakers' books that have them. So I'm going to introduce our three speakers, and then each of them are going to talk about 12 to 15 minutes, and they've allowed me to kindly interrupt them if they've gone over, so that we can have time at the end for a question and answer. So first, Dr. Mark Goldstein, and all our speakers are also physicians. Mark is a former UCLA assistant clinical professor of psychiatry. He's a former FBI police hostage negotiation trainer and author or co-author of 9 books, including Just Listen, which became the top book on listening in the world. He recently co-authored Why Cope When You Can Heal: How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD and Trauma to Triumph, a roadmap for leading through disruption and thriving on the other side. And he also hosts My Wake Up Call podcast. And the next speaker we have is Dr. Aseem Desai. He's a cardiac electrophysiologist and author of Restart Your Heart. He has expertise in heart rhythm disorders and the autonomic nervous system. Dr. Desai has served on the St. Joseph Health Physician Wellbeing Task Force and has taught mindfulness to healthcare providers as part of the Own It initiative. And our third speaker is Dr. Russ Kennedy. He's a medical doctor with an additional degree in neuroscience. He has a commitment to helping people who struggle with mental illness. He's the author of the book Anxiety RX. He's a certified RYT 200 yoga teacher and a speaker with the National Speakers Association, or Bureau, excuse me. And for many years, he was a doctor by day and a stand-up comic by night, performing in comedy clubs across the country. His area of expertise is anxiety, as he has lived with anxiety himself for many years and is known as the Anxiety MD. So I'm going to let each speaker speak for 12 to 15 minutes. I've had asked by them to give them a little sign at about 12 minutes. So we'll start with Aseem, I believe, was the first speaker. So I give you Dr. Desai.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ellen, for that kind introduction. It's so great to be here. And gosh, Jonathan said, I think 750 attendees. It's just truly amazing. Well, it's really my pleasure today to be speaking alongside Russ and Mark, two very accomplished physicians in so many different ways. And I'll provide my perspective from the standpoint of the heart, as we talk quite a bit about the brain. In regards to stress and burnout, the heart is very much involved. Well, once upon a time, there was a doctor who was part of a large multi-specialty group. The doctor truly thrived. He was connected socially, to his family, to his colleagues, to his patients. Then one day, one of the partners left the group suddenly, and that person shared call with this doctor. So the doctor was left to take call every day for almost a year. So you can imagine what then happened. Tireless nights, no nutrition, limited exercise, withering relationships, just went down the spiral. So one day, it was a Wednesday, this doctor was supposed to go to surgery, had a surgery in about 30 minutes. And the doctor woke up and basically said, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. He was frozen, yet he felt his heart just racing, sweaty, nauseous, really out of sorts. And then he had this very brief realization. There was one person that he could call, his mentor, the man who hired him, an amazing man. So he picked up the phone, and with a lot of anxiety, he called. And Rich answered the phone, and this doctor said, Rich, I can't do it anymore. I'm supposed to go to surgery in 30 minutes. I just can't do it. And this doctor felt like a true shell of his former self. And then these magic words were said by Rich Jacob. Aseem, you don't have to do this alone. We got your back. You take time, whatever time you need, and we'll welcome you back with open arms. So why am I talking about this story? This is my story, and I think it's the story of many of us at this conference and around the world. Burnout happens in a variety of different ways, and it's really, really sneaky. It's really subtle. In fact, if you look at this curve, the Yerkes-Dodson model, and you go from states of calm to eustress, which is good stress, to distress, which is bad stress, you have this shape. And many of us have experienced that when we're doing well in our job, when we're performing well, when we're totally connected, we have that edge. There's stress, but it's good stress. And you don't really realize that maybe you're not sleeping that well, maybe you're not eating that well. You're so excited about what's going on, and that's how I felt initially. And then before you know it, your body and your mind start draining, and you can head into this area of fatigue and exhaustion. And then, of course, our institutions, our health systems, there's a lot of challenges, as we know nowadays, about getting institutions to look at us as healthcare providers and realize that we are the healers and we need to be healed. So our stress response is really twofold. I'm going to be talking today about the brain, the heart, the stress response, and ways in which we can hack our own nervous system and our heart to help manage this. That is our discussion today. That is our conversation today. And so if you look at stress, you have an acute stressor. It then triggers your cerebral cortex, then triggers your hypothalamus, and you have two branches. You have the sympathomedullary system, which is your acute response, and then you have your hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is your chronic response. Well, that's enough basic science for me. I had enough of that in medical school. But let's take this model and use it to just realize that when we have stress, when we're burned out, it's not mental, it's physical, it's physiological. And that's why we can't get down on ourselves when we get burnt out, because there's a lot that's not within our control. And that's why we need our colleagues and our family and our support network to help us. And so in the stress response, we have this dance, this autonomic balance between the sympathetic fight or flight response and the parasympathetic, the rest and digest response. And the vagus is a critical part of the parasympathetic response. And a lot of what's going to be talked about at this meeting, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, diaphragmatic breathing, social connections, all of these things activate your vagus nerve and calm down that fight or flight response. And we'll be talking about the vagus nerve. So traditionally, we thought of the autonomic nervous system as binary. You had the sympathetic and you had the parasympathetic. So you had your fight or flight when you were stressed out, and then you had your rest and digest and rest and relax when you were calm. Well, a different take on that was started by Dr. Stephen Porges and adapted by Deb Dana, the Polyvagal Theory. And really what it's saying is, rather than just sympathetic and parasympathetic, we have a hierarchy. We have a hierarchy in response to stress, in response to the arousal state, that our baseline homeostatic state as people is in social engagement. We're social creatures. And in that place, we are connected, we feel safe, we feel joy, we're grounded, we're curious, we're compassionate. There's so much being talked about compassion at this meeting. We're self-compassionate, we're compassionate with others. This is our natural true self. And then stress comes in. And the stress takes us into our fight or flight response, our sympathetic nervous system. And it can initially start with feelings of worry and mild anxiety, and it can escalate very quickly into panic. That's the flight. The fight, it can start with frustration. You're getting phone calls from the hospital. You're getting into too many meetings. You don't feel like you have any time for yourself. But then it can really escalate into rage. That's what happened to me. I found myself just getting more and more abrasive and just very much not myself as I went through this fight or flight response. And then you get to freeze, and you remember that story. I was in bed waiting to do that surgery, and I was frozen. I was frozen because I was in this, in some ways, near-death state. The freeze state is what animals go through when they're under so much stress. It's what humans go through when we're in such severe depression that we just shut down. We feel helpless. A lot of trauma that happens at an early age results in this kind of response, a feeling of helplessness. We as physicians, we as healthcare providers, we feel helpless in the context of burnout, in this epidemic in the midst of a global pandemic, this burnout epidemic, until ultimately you start to dissociate from your own experience as a coping mechanism, and that descends into shame and ultimately feeling trapped. Well, there's a way out. It's important to recognize these are always going to exist. There's always going to be stress. We can learn techniques, we can learn technologies, we can learn from each other. There's so much that's been discovered by science in terms of the control that we do have. And that's what we need to focus on. How do we control our response? So if you look at Deb Dana's model of a ladder and the autonomic ladder, our base state, our homeostatic state is that ventral vagus place where we feel connected to the world. When I was thriving and passionate in my calling as a doctor, and then you undergo stress and you go from that calm to eustress state initially, and then it can descend quickly into distress. We're in the sympathetic nervous system, we're in danger, we're in threat. We need to run or fight back until eventually the stress gets so bad that we descend into that freeze state. And so your vagus nerve, and the reason why it's called the polyvagal theory is your vagus nerve has these two components. It's got the ventral, which is the front part, and it's got the dorsal, which is the back part. And as I was preparing for this talk, I have to admit, as a cardiologist and as an electrophysiologist, I do catheter ablation for a living for AFib. And this was a wonderful opportunity to learn about this and to learn from my colleagues and to learn from Russ and Mark today. And I am so grateful to be a part of this community today in learning about this state of how we can descend and ascend this ladder. And so our vagus nerve, I mean, it innervates our whole body, right? And we always think of it as sort of efferent, you know, that the brain is sending out through the vagus signals to the rest of the body, but more signals are actually afferent going from the body to the brain. The heart has an intrinsic nervous system. The gut has an intrinsic nervous system, the enteric nervous system. And these can take in stimuli from the outside world, from the inside world, and send it to the brain. There are studies that show that the cardiovascular response to stress, to stimuli, can precede the brain's response before there's processing that occurs. We know about the broken heart syndrome and how acute emotional or physical stress can change the shape of the heart muscle, called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So it's amazing, this interplay, this dance between the two organs, the brain and the heart and the brain. A stroke is like a heart attack. A seizure is like a cardiac arrhythmia. And the vagus, we encounter the vagus every day in electrophysiology. We use it to stop abnormal heart rhythms, for example. And so we can hack that vagus nerve. We can get back to that state of ventral vagus social engagement at homeostatic state by hacking the vagus nerve. And a lot of it is through awareness. And whether that's breath awareness with breath work, whether that's a meditative awareness, focused breathing, mantra-based meditation, thought-based meditation, walking meditation, awareness, sensory meditation, and then a body in movement, body as in yoga with breathing coupled with movement, or physical aerobic exercise activating your vagus nerve. And then you have C, connection, That is the third way you can hack your vagus nerve. Connection comes in two flavors. Number one, connection is to ourselves and to the world around us. And that can happen through compassion, through self-compassion. That is what connects us. And so the ABCs, we're used to thinking about airway, breathing, and circulation as physicians when we arrive to an emergency situation. This is our emergency situation. We can hack our vagus nerve with awareness, with our body, and with being connected. So the heart and the brain, this beautiful connection between the two organs. We heard from two of the leaders at the start of this meeting.
I'm going to give you a warning for, you have about a minute left, and I'm so enjoying these slides in your talk.
Thank you so much.
I have to cut you off.
This is what we're talking about, too passionate. Well, we're going to go real fast, but we're going to be purposeful. Heart rate variability, it's an amazing parameter. I encourage you to learn about it. We can talk offline. It connects your brain and the heart. It's available in wearable devices. We have HeartMath. It's a company that creates a device that incorporates emotion, breath work, and heart rate variability to monitor your state of stress and to help you transition to a better place. So in summary, we can go from stress to control. We can learn about techniques and technologies. And I got back to medicine. I went back to medicine. I am so grateful to Providence Mission Heritage Medical Group and my hospital for welcoming me back. And there's life beyond burnout. I was frozen in that bed. I'm married to my best friend. My call to action for all of you, go from airway, breathing, circulation to awareness, body, and connection. Don't be shy asking for help. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means that you're wise. And Brene Brown told us, our experiences can be the survival guide for another. Thank you to all the people that were involved in this summit. And I'll leave with Arianna Huffington's wonderful quote, the purpose of human life, no matter who is controlling it, is to love whoever is around to be loved. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to see if, are you allowed to share your slide deck with the audience?
I am more than happy to. You just tell me how I'm supposed to do it, and I am more than happy to.
We'll let you know, and I'll let the audience know. And thank you so much, Dr. Desai. It was really excellent to hear you. And so we're going to go over to Dr. Mark Goulston. Am I saying that correctly, Dr. Mark?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and I hope we can all get the slides because he zipped through them, and I know I want a collection of them. And thank you all for putting this together. And thank you all for attending. A while back, I met with my urologist, this wonderful woman. She was an hour and a half late, because of all the stresses. I was getting a little stressed out because it caused me to have to be late for something, but there was nothing I could do about it. There was nothing she could do about it. And then I could hear her looking through the chart outside the door, that telltale sign that you're about to be seen. And then she walks in, and I could see that she was stressed out, but then she quickly gathered herself. She became focused. She became thorough. She came up with options that other doctors hadn't. And I sent her a text message, and I said, I want to thank you for being so thorough, caring, and such a good doctor, especially when I could tell that today was a zoo for you. And I'm so lucky to have you as my doctor. I got a text back within a half an hour, and I could tell she was crying. But I think she was crying with acknowledgement and relief. And too often we go through life thinking that we don't need that, but we do. We think of ourselves as having to provide that for others, but no, we're fine. We're fine. A friend of mine told me that when you ask someone how they're doing and they say great, they're usually good, but when they say I'm fine, they're not. And many of us are not fine. And during COVID, I was busy. I co-authored 2 books with a woman, Dr. Diana Hendel. And my whole purpose in writing the 2 books One was called Why Cope When You Can Heal, how healthcare heroes can recover from, healthcare heroes of COVID-19 can recover from PTSD. And then we wrote another book called Trauma to Triumph, a roadmap for leading through disruption, thriving on the other side. My whole purpose in co-authoring these was to launch my co-author, Dr. Handel, onto the world. She was the CEO of Long Beach Memorial Hospital when on her 100th day as CEO, an employee of the month came in and killed his 2 supervisors and himself. And she led the hospital through that back to financial and psychological saneness and profitability. And she wrote a memoir called Responsible, which is riveting. It's called Responsible, a memoir. And I had her on my podcast. And when we were thinking of the book, Why Cope When You Can Heal, and I reached out to people who I know had been traumatized. When I reached out to women who I know had been traumatized, they teared up. And when I told the title to men, they fought back tears. And when I asked some of these people what's going on, what the women would say, because they were more in touch with their feelings and allowing themselves to demonstrate them, they would say, if only.
$340,000.
I said, if only what? And they said, if only I could heal, because I cope. And I said, what do you mean? And they looked at me and they say, I'm not the same. I'm different. And when you say to these people, when you say to our healthcare colleagues, good for you, you're so courageous that you made it through. When I would say that to people, they would look at me and they'd say, it's not courage. I'm not the same. And then if you ask them, once this is over, do you think you could go through it again? Many of them will just look at you flat out and say, I don't know why it's not taking me down now. I don't think I can go through it. So why cope when you can heal? What we dug into is everything you have to push down and push away so that you can focus and function. There's a cumulative collective effect where it feels like it's going to burst through you. I remember someone I spoke to said when they were working in the hospital and seeing horrific scenes, they said it's like taking a screeching alley cat and locking it in a cellar, and then another one, and then 5 more, then 50 more, then 100 more. And they know that even though there's this veneer of being almost superhuman, making it through those 24 and 36-hour shifts, they know that everything that they push down is going to come out. And what we talk about, we actually have in Why Cope When You Can Heal, something we call the 12 phases emotional algorithm. And I don't have the time to go through all of it, but basically when we see things that are horrific, we feel a sense of horror, we feel a sense of terror, we get frightened, we think we're going to panic, but because we're so duty bound, we push it down, we get this adrenaline rush, which insulates us from not just pain, but insulates us from those thoughts and feelings. But when the danger goes away, and it will for all of us, the insulation goes away. And it feels as if those feelings and thoughts that we pushed away to survive are going to come up and rip us apart. And we've wanted to rename PTSD to what people live, which we believe is re-traumatization avoidance, because all the symptoms of PTSD are to keep away all these thoughts, feelings that you push down to survive, because you're afraid that if they run loose, they're going to take you down. And if you think of all the symptoms of PTSD, they are all an effort to avoid being re-traumatized. Also, something that we talked about in the book, and something I want to give you that's tactical, something we call the stress relief exercise and journal. Since the book has come out, I've amended it to be called the Burnout Prevention Journal. And basically what you do is imagine someone living or dead who cares about you or cared about you, someone who believed in you when you didn't, someone who was there for you when you weren't, like the person Aseem spoke about. And what you do in this journal, or you can memorize the exercise, is you imagine that person talking you down from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5, and you imagine them asking you these questions. What was something you felt frustrated, angry, or disappointed about today? Then you imagine them asking you, what did it make you want to do? This is the most important thing, because that's the impulse, the survival impulse that you had to suppress, and it took all your energy. What did you do? How did it work out? If this situation were to occur tomorrow, what would be a better thing to do? What might be something that you could change in your setting that might prevent this from happening? And what would be a first step towards doing it? Why does something like this work? Why did my urologist start to cry? Why did Aseem start to get emotional as he was reliving someone caring about him? Well, what this exercise does is it gives you a surge of oxytocin, because as you imagine someone caring about you, talking you through these steps, and you feel the emotional caring as that urologist felt my caring about her, what happens is oxytocin counteracts high cortisol. Cortisol goes down, your amygdala settles down, your blood flow goes from your survival lower brain up to your upper brain. You're able to think, and you often start to cry with relief. And something else, if you do this exercise that we encourage, is find that person, living or dead, and thank them for what they did. And if they're not around, find their next of kin. It'll make their day, it'll make your day, and you'll be flooded with a sense of oxytocin, connectedness, and it may help you prevent a burning out. So I think we can stop there. So I hopefully we'll be having time for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goulston. It was great to hear you. And I'm going to now introduce Dr. Russell Kennedy, the anxiety doctor.
Hey, it's great to be here. It really is. It kind of reminds me a little bit about, I did stand-up comedy for 15 years. For 15 years, I was a doctor in an urgent care clinic in the daytime, and I would go and do stand-up comedy at night. So it's like, yeah, it's great to be here. Happy to help. But I want to talk about my own kind of story as far as that kind of stuff. But I would like to start with a joke. And it's, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it only takes one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. So there's another joke that I used to tell on stage about saying laughter. Laughter is so important. Laughter puts us into our parasympathetic nervous system. And Aseem kind of alluded to that with the vagus nerve. And I used to have this joke, and I would say, laughter is the best medicine, right? You've heard that. Laughter is the best medicine. Not if you have chlamydia. No, apparently you can laugh and laugh and laugh, and it's still going to burn. So penicillin is the best, well, doxycycline actually is the best medicine for that. So getting to my story, February 8th, 2013 was the last day I practiced as an allopathic physician. I was in a really bad state back then. I've always had anxiety. My father had bipolar and schizophrenia. So I grew up with a bipolar schizophrenic father. And I was always paranoid that I was going to develop his illness. So I developed this anxiety illness as a response. And I got into medicine to kind of help people, to get some status. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But it was really important to me to kind of see if I could regulate my autonomic nervous system, because I've studied this stuff for many years in my degree of neuroscience, and I also have a background in developmental psychology, because I do think everything starts with us as children. We are sort of unconscious, childish beings at our innocent core. And if we can connect with those innocent beings and not judge ourselves for our perceived failures and connect with that younger part of ourselves, I think that will see us through a burnout. It certainly saw me through mine. So February the 8th, 2013, I was breathing in the bathroom. I think the MOAs thought that I must have been, I kept telling, I have stomach issues or whatever, but they must have known, because I would see two people go to the bathroom and breathe and then come back and regulate myself as best I could. And I also, that evening, after I finished my shift, was supposed to go out and do stand-up, but I was going through a drugstore here in Canada, and I ruptured my left Achilles tendon, fully ruptured. because, like an arrogant doctor, I had injected it with lidocaine and cortisone because 4 years ago I had Achilles tendonitis and basically did the same thing and it worked like a charm. So I thought, worked once, might as well work again, right? No, it actually ruptured. But that was the straw that basically broke the doctor's back. You know, that was the part of me that just said, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. So what is burnout? I was burned out. So for me, it's a state of conflict in our work that creates increasing inner turmoil. It's when the emotional and physical demands outweigh the rewards. So when we're younger, as Aseem had in his slide, we felt connected. We felt like we were doing something. We were making progress. Great, great. But once that starts to go, once you start getting into bureaucracy or really difficult patients, or you're feeling like you're not making progress, once the demands outweigh the rewards, you're on a slippery slope. And Aseem's slide showed that very well, getting into frustration, anger, depression, anxiety. What we call dorsal vagal shutdown is in the polyvagal theory, when the vagus nerve says we've had enough. It's kind of like when an animal gets cornered by a predator and there's no way out. That vagus nerve will shut us completely down. It basically shuts down our heart rate. We feign death because our only chance of survival at that point is to feign death and hope that the predator goes away. But the predator, in the form of maybe HMOs or whatever, is always there. It's always there. You can't escape from it. So how do you get back? Well, you really have to get back to your true self. It really comes down to it. And I have to remind people that I have a degree in neuroscience and developmental psychology and a medical doctorate degree, because I'm going to get ethereal on your ass at this point. You know, you really have to connect with that part of you that hurts. And, you know, I have to ask myself, and I have to ask anybody who comes to me for burnout advice, why did you go into medicine? Like, why did you go in? And be perfectly honest. For me, I felt insignificant as a child. Most of the energy went to my dad. I really didn't feel like I had any say in anything. I became a rescuer to try and rescue my dad. And I needed validation because I really just wasn't heard in my family. So I thought, well, if I become a physician, well, people will have to pay attention to me. I'll have to be important. And that worked for a while. It did actually work. So if your younger self, you know, feels like you're giving too much externally, that child in you feels that you're giving too much, you're not giving enough back to him or her, eventually that's not sustainable. So as my colleague Gabor Mate says, actually my colleague Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. And my colleague Gabor Mate said, when the body says no. So the body starts to say no, just as Aseem was saying, the body starts to say no. So how do we get back to finding that original true self? Well, you need to find and acknowledge your true roots and your true needs. What did you do for fun as a child? Have you done that as a teenager? I used to ride my bike. Have you done that? Have you gone back to that? You know, for me, what being a doctor was a substitute for getting my needs met in kind of a backhanded way. So I was heard, important, and validated in a way that I wasn't in my own family and in my youth. So what are your frustrations with your career? Again, I felt ineffectual. I didn't make any progress. Nothing was getting better, which ironically was exactly the same thing I felt with my father. I felt ineffectual with him. I didn't feel like he was making any progress. Nothing was getting better. And it was a major factor driving my burnout, because the reason I went into medicine was, if I really am honest with myself, to kind of overcome the illness that my father had, to really have some power over illness. And it didn't work out that way, because it's not going to work out that way. Medicine is going to be a very challenging field, and things are going to go wrong. And when things went wrong when I was a child, it was devastating for me. And it was the same devastation when my patients would get better. So a lot of us healthcare workers had childhood trauma. You know, in a way, physicians, you got to have a bit of a nut loose in a way to devote 10 years of your youth or 15 years of your youth to a profession that helps other people and doesn't really help you. And in fact, that profession tells you from almost day one, the patient is more important than you are. The patient comes first. So we get this mindset, we're indoctrinated, you might say, into this feeling like we have to give. And that's fine that was fine 50 years ago as a doctor when you would get lots of rewards back, but the rewards are dwindling and the challenges are increasing. So what I say to my docs that come and see me is like, find that inner self, find a challenge. Like, what really bothers you about your current job? Is it difficult patients? Is it bureaucracy? Is it money? What is it? Close your eyes and really see if you can find that in your body. Find that sense of alarm, because it is a sense of alarm in your system. And check between your chin and your pubic bone in the midline, because that's the brain structures for shame, blame, judgment, all that sort of stuff are in the midline, and it tends to refer into the body in the midline as well. So see if you can find an area that kind of lights up. For me, it's in my solar plexus. When I think of the frustrations of medicine, and then what I do is I put my hand over that area, and then I put my other hand on top of my first hand, and I really try and connect compassionately with that child in me that didn't get his needs met. Because if you get your needs met internally, you don't need to search for it so much externally. And burnout is a factor of putting yourself out and not putting enough back in. So the part that needs to be addressed is this younger version of yourself, as ethereal as that sounds. And believe me, the only way I recovered from burnout and anxiety, and I saw every CBT, ACT, every type of therapy. I did every type of therapy, and nothing really worked until I really started connecting inside with my body, using my body as a conduit to my younger self with all its unconscious drives, emotions, challenges, worries, and fears. And until I got to that root cause, anything I did externally, any sort of change my schedule, work less, organize myself better, none of that stuff worked. I mean, it worked for a week or two, but then I was right back to that same emotional place. And I just felt like completely disconnected. My mind and body had disconnected, which is why I went into yoga, because yoga, by definition, helps you match your mind and body together. But this is much more ethereal to me. This is much closer to my heart. I talked to a lot of doctors about burnout, and I found the only real way that it works is if you find your younger self, find where those unconscious programs of why you wanted to be a physician occurred in the first place, find those programs and give yourself the validation. Give yourself that feeling of importance. Give yourself that compassion that you're probably really good at giving other people, but you're not so good at giving to yourself. And when we give everything out and nothing comes back in, we start getting drained, and the body says no. So, especially if you had childhood wounding as a kid, and that was one of the reasons so many people I know, so many physicians had childhood wounding of some, I mean, we all get it to some extent, but it's really hard to get this in 10 to 15 minutes, but it really comes down to finding your younger self, because that's where your desire to become a doctor came in the first place, and seeing if those needs, that needs of that child that's still in you, are getting met. And if they're not getting met, then you've got to meet them, and you've got to figure out a way of connecting with that younger version of yourself. We're smart people, but our minds aren't going to heal burnout, because if we had childhood wounding or anything, our minds aren't going to fix it. In fact, our minds are going to make us worse. Our minds, that's the thing. That's why I became an anxiety specialist. The thing about anxiety is it's overthinking, it's rumination, it's constant overthinking. So how are we supposed to use cognitive strategies, which is more thinking, to fix what's ultimately a feeling problem? It's the feeling you've got to change, not the thinking. You can change everything externally you want. It's the feeling you've got to change. If you don't change the feeling, it doesn't matter what you do outside. It'll help for a week or a month, maybe a year, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. So it's the feeling in the body that heals you, and connecting with that feeling in the body. That's why I wrote this book. This is my journey back to healing and many of my patients, because you can't do it alone. You have to have some sort of support around you, and you have to connect with that younger version of yourself, because that's where true healing occurs, in your relationships, in your work, just in your life in general. If you don't connect with that part of your body, if you don't connect with that conduit to your younger self, to all those unconscious programs, I mean, I think it was Freud that says the body is the representation of the unconscious mind. And if all your negative programs are held in your unconscious mind, and that's what's creating your burnout, doing all these superficial cognitive things isn't going to change it. It's not. I lived that for 30 years. And until I got into my body, that's when I started to heal. That's what's allowed me to go back into practice and love what I do now. I love being an anxiety consultant because I had anxiety for many years. Don't have it anymore because I connected with my body. I connected with that younger version of myself that needed the love, care, and attention that he didn't get when he was younger. And if you can do the same, you can heal from burnout too. I'm Dr. Russ Kennedy. And as Forrest Gump would say, that's about all I got to say about that. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Dr. Kennedy. We just watched Forrest Gump again as a family. It's fabulous. Alabama. So does anybody have a question for Dr. Desai, Dr. Goulston, or Dr. Kennedy?
I want to make a comment to Russ. Those were both amazing, Aseem and Russ. And Russ is totally correct. Something that I do with some of my clients, and we'll talk after this, Russell, is take them back to a time in their life when they acted out, but they didn't get caught. Because when we were young and we experiencing some of these wounds, we didn't just experience hurt and fear, we experienced rage. And rage can fill you with guilt and shame, and we act out. And sometimes the things that we acted out can build up so that there's a feeling inside us that the reason we're not good enough is not that we're not performing well enough. It's that down deep, we wonder if we still have goodness. We're so angry at our patients. What is wrong with me? I resent them calling me after hours. I know they're scared. What is wrong with me? And so when you can go back and unlock that and understand that and realize that you couldn't be anything other than angry and enraged, as long as you don't act on it, you're good to go. But I think if it's in there, because we all felt it, we all have something called a Jungian shadow, which is the dark part of our personality that we don't want the outside world to see. And we don't want to see it ourselves because it fills us with shame. But when you can open yourself up to the darker parts of your personality, as long as you're not acting on them, you're good to go and it can help free you. Thank you, Russell.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that, I created an acronym called JABS, GABS, which is self-judgment, self-abandonment, self-blame, and self-shame. And we take these jabs at ourselves, often from childhood. If something isn't going well in your home, children take it on themselves. It must be my fault. If I could do something more, better, different. And then we create this environment of where we take these jabs at ourselves, and that becomes our normal inner voice. So if you're judging yourself all the time, if you're abandoning yourself all the time, if you're blaming yourself, if you're shaming yourself, you're never going to escape burnout. You're never going to escape anxiety because you don't create the substrate in there that would allow you to go into that place of self-protection and seeing yourself ultimately as innocent. I want to say one more quick thing. No one goes to a nursery and goes, hey, that baby's a narcissist. That baby's a people pleaser. These things are defensive accommodations that we accrue over the course of our young lives to get our needs met in sort of a maladaptive way because we're not getting our needs met in an adaptive way. And thanks, Mark. I really appreciate what you said there. It really touches me. Thank you.
I would just add, first of all, thanks, Mark and Russ, for those, really thought-provoking discussions. And, I have a question for both of you is, do you see any kind of hypnotic therapy as being helpful in getting to that regression and sort of getting to know that younger self? Have you seen that to be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of hypnosis and visualization, and you can be creative. But basically what you're trying to do is to give that younger part of yourself a feeling of compassion, being told they're okay as opposed to not okay. One thing I want to leave you with, I collect quotes, and there was one quote that just blew away all the other quotes that I've ever collected, and it comes from an organization called Project Forgive. And the founder of that is Dr. John OBrien. And I think she elaborated on it, but write this one down. Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive. Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive. And one of those apologies has to be from yourself to yourself, from your judgmental self to who you are.
Yeah, and there's another quote that I love too, which is basically when you abuse, abandon, or reject the child doesn't stop loving the parent. They stop loving themselves. And that sets the stage for all this judgment, abandonment, blame, and shame. And that becomes their mindset. And if that's your mindset, you block out love. And love is really the only thing that heals us. And a lot of times when we have trauma as children, we don't trust love because the people that were supposed to give us love, we couldn't trust. So if you can't trust love, and love is the only thing that's going to heal you, you're screwed. So you have to learn how to be that compassionate, loving parent for yourself, which I realized to physicians sounds very ethereal. And if I would have heard this 5 years ago, I thought, whatever. But it was the only thing that healed me. 30 years of CBT, ACT, EMDR, every type of therapy helped for the short term, but until I really connected with myself in the long term through my body, nothing really helped long term.
And to your point, Russ, I mean, love is acceptance, right? I mean, self-love and for other people is acceptance of the trauma, acceptance of what happened as a kid, not an excuse, not, forgiveness isn't necessarily excusing whatever happened. Yeah. It's saying, as you said, Mark, it's really a matter of accepting that apology that you'll never receive and being okay with that. And I just would add one more thing, just from a practical standpoint, would really help me in this process, because I lost my parents at a young age, and is journaling and having some way, pen to paper, of these thoughts, of these memories, and really just allowing yourself to have that time and committing to that practice every day. And do you guys find that helpful, the journaling process?
I do for sure. Yeah,
one of my greatest accomplishments is I dropped out of medical school twice and finished because I had untreated depression. And when I finally finished after 6 years, I took out a journal and I wrote down, I can't believe I made it through. They've released The Crazy Person. This is volume 253. And 9 books, 1,200 articles, and I was a C student in English. Go figure. But I want to share something else, because that quote was the most profound quote. This is the most profound insight that someone shared with me, a fellow named Maury Schechtman. He said that one of the things that is most difficult for us to admit to ourselves about others and ourselves is how deep our disappointment is. He says, because we're afraid if we admit, I'm so disappointed in my job, I'll have to quit, but I can't quit. I'm so disappointed in my wife or my husband, and we'll have to get a divorce. I don't want to. I'm so disappointed in my child, I'll be an unloving parent. And this was the counterintuitive thing he told me, and he was right on. He said, we're so afraid of just admitting it and feeling it that the two ways we avoid it are we either shut down or we get angry. And I said, isn't that an expression of disappointment? And he said, no, it's an avoidance of it. And so sometimes if you, in addition to all the things you get in touch with, what or who am I most disappointed in? And if you can just allow yourself to feel it, it will dissipate. But I think his advice was right on, that as doctors, we're disappointed every day, and we're disappointed in the system, we're disappointed in ourselves, and we shut down and we get depressed, or we get angry and then we feel guilty and ashamed. We go home, we kick the dog.
Yeah. And I have 3 dogs. So, and I think really, when you bring up forgiveness too, I think it's really important. There's such a thing that as premature forgiveness as well. I think we really do need to grieve those losses before forgiveness really can really, you come at it from both sides. But what I see with people that have, chronic anxiety, depression, that sort of stuff, is that they've forgiven their parent or whatever, but they haven't grieved the loss. They haven't gone through and metabolized that loss. And I wrote an article for Elephant Journal last year called a term I coined called cognitive bypassing, which is basically human beings have this compulsion to explain every feeling that they have. And when they do that, they move up into their heads and they lose their chest, they lose the heart, they lose the part that the emotion actually sits in. So it's learning how to be able to sit in that emotion of grief or loss or anger or envy or jealousy for 30, 60, 90 seconds without compulsively adding an explanation. I call it sensation without explanation, because then you'll actually learn how to metabolize that feeling as opposed to just running away and explaining it all the time. And it's called cognitive bypassing. And I've had more comments on that one article than almost anything else I've ever written.
Well, that totally makes sense. As a cardiologist, again, we kind of get back to, it's not just about the brain. It's not just about cognition. It's about your feelings. It's about compassion in your heart. And we even know from the science of it, I've been using the HeartMath product, this heart rate variability product, where they use this algorithm, and you can visually see going from states of frustration to states of gratitude to states of connectedness. And the algorithm isn't just breath work, it's focusing on your emotional state in here in the chest, Russ, as you do your cognitive state. And what you both are talking about, the up and down the autonomic ladder, like we were talking about. We go to the fight or flight, like we're angry as physicians, we get frustrated, then we want to run away and get burnt out. And then we want to get back to that place, that younger self. That's where we were connected. That's where we were ventral, right? Ventral vagus, that's when we were connected to ourselves. You watch a kid, right? I have a 4-year-old. He is fascinated with like a rock. I'm not talking about rocks. I'm talking about a single rock. Yeah. That is the ventral state.
And we have this system in ourselves called the human resonant circuitry, as Dr. Dan Siegel calls it, or the social engagement system, which is, facial expression, eye contact, tone of voice, body language. And we are wired to be able to connect with other people using these exact things. But what's happening with our kids these days is they're not getting that face-to-face interaction. They're getting all these screens, and that doesn't mature their social engagement system. The face is the only place in the human body where the muscles are attached directly to the skin so we can show emotion. But our kids are losing that. They're not maturing their social engagement system. And anxiety in our children is epidemic, and most of it is due to their connection and their addiction to their screens and not getting that holistic, really face-to-face connections that we need to modify our nervous system, get us into that ventral vagal state so we can actually heal ourselves and heal others.
Thank you so much, all of you. We didn't really have time for questions because you three are so interesting.
We're bantering away.
And there's been a lot of great information in the chat, and that's always a sign of a good session. So I want to thank you so much. If anybody would like to wrap up, I think Amanda, is Dr. Grinspoon next?
Dr. Duffy will be next, and Dr. Mantell will be moderating that session. So if you would like to do that session, you may stay on this stage. You don't have to leave. The link will stay live, and that session will be starting shortly.
Thank you, everybody. And I'll try to get Dr. Desai's slides somewhere so that you can download them.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank
and
you,
if you want those slides, once he emails, you can click back on the link. If you come back to where the sessions are, those will be uploaded there after we get those on. So just give us some time to get that done, but then you'll be able to view them there.
And